The rotor blades sliced through the humid Sahel air like a buzz saw, humming with a precision that betrayed none of the chaos beneath. President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's youngest and most polarizing leader in decades, sat in the rear of the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, peering through the tinted window. The sun bled orange into the horizon, casting long shadows over the parched terrain below. With each mile, the land seemed to whisper secrets, some old, some dangerous. Traoré was a soldier first, a politician by necessity. He had risen swiftly, almost too swiftly, through the military ranks during the waning days of civilian rule. A captain barely in his mid-30s, he'd led the coup that ousted President Damiba, citing growing insecurity, terrorism, and foreign manipulation. Many had seen a patriot. Others saw a pawn, or worse, a tyrant in waiting. But Traoré's charisma was undeniable. His speeches, tinged with fire and sovereignty, had galvanized a nation weary of French influence and jihadist raids. Now, nearly 2 years into his rule, he was en route to the northern province of Somme, a region plagued by extremist insurgents and illicit trade routes. Officially, it was a goodwill mission to inspect military outposts and assess civilian needs. Unofficially, it was something else, something deeper. Sitting beside him was Colonel Issaka Diallo, a man who had once trained with Traoré at the Camboin's military academy. They shared a past few knew about, an incident buried in the archives of the Intelligence Directorate. Diallo had been unusually quiet during the flight. Traoré noticed. He noticed everything. "You've said little, Issaka," Traoré said, breaking the drone of the rotors with his deep, deliberate voice. Diallo forced a smile. "Just absorbing the landscape, sir. It changes every time we fly." Traoré nodded but didn't believe him. He leaned back, eyes narrowing, instinct pricking. For weeks now, his intelligence chief, Yakuba Sawadogo, had warned him of whispers, talk of betrayal, plans hushed in encrypted messages, and movements tracked only by satellites. The helicopter tilted slightly as it descended toward the airstrip near Djibo. 2 other choppers flanked them in formation. Inside, the mood shifted. Soldiers began checking weapons. Traoré adjusted his flak vest, more out of ritual than fear. But fear, whether admitted or not, had begun creeping into his nights like a slow poison. There had been attempts. The poisoned aid, the tampered brake line on the convoy, the disappearing drone footage from the last ambush site. And yet, the threat wasn't just external. Burkina Faso was a powder keg of tribal politics, corporate greed, foreign espionage, and revolutionary idealism. Traoré had made enemies in every category. Oil companies from the Gulf dislodged by his nationalization push. French diplomats undermined by his rejection of military aid. Even fellow Pan-Africanists, some of whom believed he was a puppet of Russian interests. As the Black Hawk landed and the dust storm settled, the welcoming committee assembled. Local commanders, elders, and reporters from the state-run RTB network. Traoré stepped out to cheers and salutes. But behind the staged smiles and slogans were anxious eyes. Something was off. The air was thick with more than heat. At the evening briefing inside the garrison HQ, Traoré reviewed maps, terrain reports, and intercepted messages from local insurgent groups. One report in particular caught his eye. An unusual spike in satellite phone calls coming from a supposedly neutral nomadic encampment just 15 kilometers away. "We should investigate this ourselves," Traoré said. Diallo raised an eyebrow. "Sir, that's not protocol. We can send recon." "No. I want to see this firsthand." Traoré's voice ended the conversation. The room fell into obedient silence. By 0500 hours the next morning, a smaller team of elite commandos assembled for the visit. Traoré boarded the lead helicopter with Diallo, a few trusted men, and his communications officer, Captain Isata Ouedraogo, one of the few he fully trusted. She'd once disobeyed a direct order to pull him from a collapsing building in Fadangorma during a firefight. She bore the scar for it still. The chopper rose, slicing through morning haze, the sun a pale disk behind thin clouds. About 8 minutes into the flight, something strange occurred. A static pulse crackled through the comm system. Then silence. Isata tapped her headset, frowning. Comms blackout. Could be signal jamming, Diallo muttered. Or a malfunction, she replied. But her voice was taut. Traoré leaned forward. Get visual confirmation from the second chopper. She nodded, reaching for the auxiliary relay system. Too late. A deafening thud rocked the chopper. The hull trembled violently, as if a giant hand had struck it from below. Red alarms flared on the control panel. One engine burst into flames. The pilot screamed something unintelligible. Then total chaos. The aircraft dipped hard to the right, smoke flooding the cabin. One soldier was hurled into the doorframe. Diallo grabbed the seat in front of him, blood streaming from a head gash. Isata tried to steady Traoré, who was buckled in but rattled by the force. The windshield cracked. The altimeter spun like a possessed compass. Through the haze, Traoré locked eyes with Diallo, and saw it. Not fear, not confusion, but something colder, deliberate. Traoré's instincts screamed. But the chopper was already spinning. The tail rotor had failed. They were plummeting. Fast. Brace for impact, the pilot shouted. Then static. Then nothing. The helicopter slammed into the hard, sun-baked earth in a burst of shredded steel and fire. Dust rose like a funeral shroud. The second chopper, circling above, screamed for coordinates, but all they could see was black smoke billowing into the endless sky. Down on the ground, the silence was thick. Somewhere in the wreckage, amidst the flames and mangled metal, a movement stirred. A hand, a cough, and then the sound of boots approaching. Not rescue, but arrival. Smoke clawed at the early dawn like a wounded beast, rising in dark coils above the mangled remains of the downed helicopter. Flames hissed where fuel still burned, the acrid stench of scorched metal and flesh tainting the breeze. A symphony of agony filled the air, whimpers, crackling embers, groans from twisted bodies still half alive beneath the wreckage. President Ibrahim Traoré coughed violently, rolling over on his side, blood caking the side of his face. His left arm was broken. He could feel the sickening dislocation with each movement, but his mind cut through the pain. Instinct, honed through years of combat and political warfare, seized control. He forced his eyes open. Isata Ouedraogo was nearby, pinned under a crumpled bulkhead, her legs immobile but her hand twitching toward her sidearm. The pilot was dead. So was the radio operator, neck twisted unnaturally, half of his seat still lodged in his chest. But Diallo, where was Diallo? Traoré tried to stand, failed, then crawled. Each movement tore at him, but he had to know. He had seen that look in Diallo's eyes, that moment before the crash. It hadn't been fear. It had been anticipation, calculation. There had been no explosion from outside, no heat signature from a rocket or missile. The Black Hawk had been sabotaged. Suddenly, voices, foreign, not French, not local dialects, Russian. Traoré froze, lowering himself instinctively into the shadow of the twisted fuselage. He held his breath as a group of 4 figures emerged from the tree-line beyond the crash site, moving like ghosts through the dust. Their gear was high-end, suppressed rifles, encrypted comms, no national insignia. Mercenaries. Wagner most likely. He'd heard whispers of their presence in the region, aiding anti-French operations, propping up regimes and toppling others when instructed. Search for survivors, one said in Russian. Secure the target. Verify the kill. The target. That could only be him. Asada stirred, coughing blood. One of the mercenaries turned toward her. Traoré's fingers closed around a sidearm half buried beneath debris. He aimed but hesitated. The angle wasn't clean. He'd hit her too. The mercenary raised his weapon. A shot rang out, but not from Traoré's pistol. A clean shot from the distance struck the mercenary in the head, dropping him instantly. The others scattered, shouting commands in Russian. Another shot, then a third. From the shadows of the forest, 3 local fighters emerged, cloaked in dusty robes, their Kalashnikovs steady. Not insurgents, not Wagner, volunteers. Traoré recognized one of them, Commander Zongo, leader of a civilian defense militia from the outskirts of Kaya. Zongo moved with urgency, issuing orders in more as 2 of his men helped Asada from the wreckage. Zongo spotted Traoré and froze. Mon President? Traoré tried to stand but faltered. Zongo rushed to his side, disbelief etched on his face. You're alive. We were told. I'm not dead yet, Traoré said hoarsely, gripping Zongo's arm. How did you find us? We picked up strange radio traffic, frequencies we don't normally hear in this region. Then the distress beacon activated for less than 2 minutes before it went silent again. Asada, now bandaged and supported by one of the volunteers, limped over. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. Diallo, she said. Traoré nodded grimly. He's behind this, or part of it. Zongo's expression darkened. You're saying your own man tried to kill you? I'm saying this was no accident. Suddenly, gunfire erupted to the north. The mercenaries weren't retreating. They were calling in reinforcements. Within minutes, the group would be overrun. We can't stay here, Zongo said. There's an old Fulani cattle route through the forest. It leads to a supply hut we use for operations. But we have to move. Now. Traoré nodded. Lead the way. The journey through the bush was grueling. With limited water, no radio contact, and several wounded, they advanced cautiously. Traoré was carried on a makeshift stretcher until he demanded to walk. He bound his broken arm to his chest with strips of torn uniform and pushed forward with grim determination. The pain was relentless, but it fueled him. As they moved deeper into the brush, Traoré's mind raced. Diallo had been his second-in-command for over a year, his operations chief, and the last man to review the flight plan. He had access to every detail. The signal blackout, the mechanical failure, it was too precise. And the presence of Wagner operatives? That raised even darker questions. Was this an internal coup backed by foreign powers? His thoughts darkened further when Asada approached him during a brief rest. Sir, she said quietly, there's something else. What is it? I accessed a backup server before we left base yesterday. A routine security sweep. I found a message, a draft email on Diallo's restricted tablet. It was addressed to a private server in Dubai, encrypted, but the metadata listed cargo manifests, aircraft details, coordinates. Dubai, Traoré echoed. What was being sent? Flight plans, helicopter maintenance logs. Even your personal travel itinerary for the next 2 months. That confirmed it. Diallo hadn't just betrayed him, he had sold him out. And Dubai? Likely a shell company, a pass-through point for whoever was financing the plot. Could be oil magnates, angry over nationalization. Could be foreign intelligence. Could be both. By the time the group reached the supply hut, night had fallen. The structure was barely more than a mud brick bunker, hidden beneath overgrown baobab trees. Inside, there were radios, maps, and a solar battery. Zongo locked the door behind them and ordered guards posted. Traoré sat against the wall, his breathing ragged. Isata knelt beside him with clean water and antibiotics. He drank slowly, then looked at her with new resolve. "They will announce my death soon," he said. She nodded. "Maybe already have. Let them. We'll use it." Her eyes widened. "We disappear. For now," he continued. "But we document everything. The sabotage, the mercenaries, Diallo's betrayal. Then we strike back. Not with bullets, but with truth. This war isn't just about territory. It's about control of the story, of Africa's future." A pause. A distant explosion echoed in the night. Too far to be a threat, but close enough to remind them the game was still being played. And somewhere, Colonel Isaka Diallo was preparing for his next move, believing the president was dead. But Ibrahim Traoré was not just alive. He was reborn. Morning light seeped through the cracks of the mud brick shelter, washing the room in a pale, almost ghostly hue. Ibrahim Traoré sat awake against the rough wall, studying a tattered map spread across his knees. His arm throbbed dully under the tight makeshift sling, but his mind was sharper than it had ever been. Today was the day. They had spent the last 2 nights gathering intelligence from sympathizers, cattle herders, local traders, even rogue officers loyal to Traoré's dream of a sovereign Burkina Faso. Each brought pieces of a puzzle that, when assembled, exposed a conspiracy far larger than Traoré had dared imagine. Diallo had not acted alone. He was backed by a coalition. Rogue military generals who resented Traoré's sweeping anti-corruption reforms, businessmen furious at nationalized mining contracts, and foreign operatives whose governments profited from Burkina Faso's instability. They had paid mercenaries to eliminate Traoré and offered Diallo the presidency in return. The plan had been perfect, except Traoré refused to die. Isata entered the room quietly, carrying a small, battered radio. She tuned it to the state broadcaster. Static crackled. Then a sharp, officious voice broke through. "Today, Acting President Isaka Diallo will address the nation regarding the tragic death of President Ibrahim Traoré. A period of mourning has been declared. A formal transition of power is expected." Traoré leaned back, exhaling slowly. "They're moving fast," Isata said, her voice low and tight. "Too fast. They want to consolidate before anyone can question it." Traoré nodded. "Then we strike before the lie settles into truth." Outside, Zongo and his volunteers prepped an old military truck they had salvaged. It was armored just enough to absorb gunfire but fast enough to dodge a pursuit. Hidden beneath a false floor were hard drives, video footage, eyewitness testimonies, all the evidence Traoré needed to expose Diallo and his backers. But Traoré knew exposing the truth wouldn't be enough. In a world of weaponized narratives, he needed a spectacle, a symbol, and he would deliver it personally. By noon, they were racing toward Ouagadougou, the capital, taking back roads known only to smugglers and cattle drivers. Dust trailed behind them in thick plumes. Checkpoints were avoided, surveillance drones evaded. They moved like ghosts. The plan was simple. Crash Diallo's televised inauguration. Broadcast the truth to the world before they could silence him again. At 2:17 p.m., the truck barreled through the final checkpoint outside the city, plowing past stunned guards who barely managed to raise their weapons. Traoré, hunched low inside the back compartment, could feel his heart hammering in his chest. Not from fear, but from purpose. The National Assembly building loomed ahead, a concrete fortress swarmed by soldiers, dignitaries, and foreign press. Giant screens displayed Diallo's image, his face grave and noble as he prepared to accept the presidency. Zongo jerked the wheel hard, bringing the truck to a screeching halt just outside the main plaza. Doors flew open. Traoré, Isata, and half a dozen volunteers surged out, weapons hidden under cloaks, hard drives and data chips clutched tightly. Chaos erupted. "Traoré is alive!" someone screamed. Cameras whipped around. Soldiers froze, unsure whether to shoot or salute. Civilians gasped, clutching their phones, recording. The crowd buzzed with disbelief. Up on the stage, Diallo's face drained of color. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Traoré stepped forward. He wore no presidential sash, no grand uniform, just a tattered flak jacket, dust-streaked trousers, and a blood-stained sling. A man who had survived death itself. He grabbed a nearby press microphone. "I am Ibrahim Traoré," he said, voice raw but steady, amplified across the square and onto every television and radio in the nation. "And I have been betrayed." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Traoré held up a small data drive. "This contains evidence of a plot against our nation, engineered by traitors within our own ranks, financed by foreign interests who wish to keep us divided and weak. These cowards staged my death to steal your future." Behind him, Isata and Zongo began broadcasting the files onto the giant screens: emails, bank transfers, intercepted communications. Names, faces, accounts. Proof. Undeniable. The crowd surged with fury, not at Traoré, but at Diallo and his conspirators. Shouts filled the air. Soldiers wavered, glancing at one another, unsure whether to obey the man they now knew to be a traitor. Diallo made a desperate move, lunging toward a guard for his sidearm. But before he could reach it, Zongo fired a warning shot into the ground. Diallo froze, his plan crumbling into dust. Within minutes, loyalist forces surrounded him. He was stripped of his weapon, shackled, and led away, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. His co-conspirators, scattered among the crowd, were also rounded up, some trying to flee, others surrendering meekly. Traoré watched it all with weary eyes. Justice was being served, but he knew this was only the beginning. The real work lay ahead, rebuilding trust, rebuilding hope. By sunset, Traoré addressed the nation again, this time from the steps of the National Assembly, flanked by citizens, soldiers, and officials who had refused to sell out their homeland. "I am not a king," he said. "I am not a god. I am merely a servant of the people. I bleed as you bleed. I dream as you dream. And today, together, we reclaim our destiny." The roar from the crowd was deafening. That night, as celebrations erupted across Burkina Faso, Traoré sat quietly in his modest office, the hard drives locked in a steel safe, the broken sling still tied around his shoulder. He stared out at the stars, breathing in the cool night air. He had walked through fire, through betrayal, through death itself. And he had emerged not just alive but victorious. In the distance, fireworks burst across the sky in brilliant colors, reflections of a people no longer willing to be pawns in someone else's game. Burkina Faso had a future again, and Ibrahim Traoré, battered but unbowed, would lead them into it.